Good morning, everyone. I show it's 9:30. We'll call the meeting to order. I appreciate everyone attending today. We also have attendance virtually. Those that are participating virtually, find a way to speak up if you need to be recognized. We'll make sure you have the opportunity to participate. Ken, let's proceed with the roll call.
Tim Andrus.
Here.
Ryan Bale. John Byram.
Here.
Kurt Campbell. Will Conley. Debbie Farmer.
Here.
Charlie Flatten. Steve Graham.
Here.
Carol Graham. Vic Hildebrand. Tom Youngman. Russell Labus.
Here.
Glenn Lord.
Here.
Scooter Mangold.
Here.
Dan Myers for Andrew McBride.
Here.
Daniel Meyer. Gary Middleton.
Here.
Travis Pruski.
Here.
Robert Fuente.
Here.
Vanessa Pugh Williams. Humberto Ramos.
Here.
Weldon Riggs.
Here.
Roland Ruiz.
Here.
Daryl Brownlow for Diane Savage.
Here.
Darren Simmons. Mitchell Sowards. Jonathan Stinson.
Here.
Tom Taggart.
Here.
Diane Wasenick.
Here.
Adam Yablonsky.
Here.
Dan Yoxel.
Here.
Marty Kelly. Rusty Ray. Ronald Fiesler.
Here.
Ileana Delgado. Don McGee. Michelle Foss.
Here.
Charles Wiedenfeld. Jamie McCool.
Here.
Carl Kroll.
Very good. We have a quorum present. We'll proceed with the meeting. We'll move to agenda item 2, public comment. Received one request to make public comment. Rachel Slavlinski.
Hello. A few committee members, is the mic on? Can you hear me okay with it? All right. I thank committee members for your dedicated service here to Regional and the water planning of Texas. My name's Rachel Zuminski. I'm a resident of San Antonio. And you can pop up here every couple of years to make a comment to you about the barriers to the public of participating in the water planning process in this state. And I recently had the privilege to meet with 3 members of the executive committee, and we talked about this, and I heard repeatedly that the public is not interested in participating in water planning in Texas, and I very much disagree with that. But I would say to you, how do you know? And in particular, I'm here once again to talk about your public-facing information. And I thought, because this is a recurring thing that I talk about, and in the past, generally after I speak, a few weeks or maybe a few days later, would get a letter from Cole Ruiz and said, it was difficult to find information, but if you look at our website, eventually you can find some information. But I thought perhaps a lot of businesses in this situation have at least an employee, and usually someone who's not an employee. Regularly look at your website with a list of things that they want people to be able to find and say, can they find them? And as that is a practice that has clearly not been adopted by this group, I would like to invite you today instead to go through the process with me. If you'll just bring out your mobile device, whichever one you usually use the internet on, and just follow with me on the process, then I think you'll understand what I mean, and maybe I can communicate a little more clearly. If you go to your external website for Region L, because as you know, Region L is one of the few regions that has chosen to have its own external website. When people go to the TWDB website and see that you have chosen to have your own external website, that signals to them that there's something important there that you want them to see that they're not going to get on the TWDB website. And so, of course, they're going to go there and expect to find that. And if you go there to the landing page on home, and then you see that on the home that it says current public notices, and the last one was 2023. But if you wanted to get more involved in the cycle, it does say at the top, at the very top, 6th cycle, 2026 RWP. And so when we look at that, it tells us as of November 2020, etc., and it has the information posted here, but it doesn't tell you anything about where the meetings are. So if you wanted to be involved in the process, how would you find out? See, this is where the number one barrier to the public starts, is that you're trying to get information, it's not evident where it is. So you could look at maybe the planning process and is someone who's been using computers, as I have for more than 40 years, would do that. But again, that is a huge barrier for most people in the general public who are not going to persist even that much. And if you look at all the planning process here, there are so many things that are hyperlinked. And if you actually happen to look at the planning meetings, last month it had the list for 2022, and it did not show any meetings for 2023. And as you can see, that is no longer the case. It now says, this is somewhat embarrassing, isn't it? It seems we can't find what you are looking for. Perhaps searching or one of the links below can help. So my question to you is, do you really need to have the meetings on an external website? Because if you have a link and there's nothing there, or it doesn't show you're even meeting this year, it is a barrier to people who do want to participate. And rather than thinking that no one in the public wants to participate, you consider, if you're in the public and you're looking at this website, what does this say? It says they don't want us to participate. Or maybe there's nothing to participate in. You do a lot of work, but how are people going to find out about it if they want to? But if we go to the TWDB website, we go through that. When you go to the Region L Planning Group page, which probably most of y'all have bookmarked, when we get over here, then how are we going to find that it has a lot of information here? And eventually you will always find it from this website when the website's up. Sometimes they have. But see here, it very much highlights your external website. So you're looking here, you're looking at the map, you're looking at, and it has the meeting links on the external website. It says, but then it has next meeting. So we go here. Okay, so think how many links have you already had to go through once you landed on the TWDB website before you even got to this page? At least 4, right? Then you see here, okay, now you need to know which region are you in. And we happen to know it's Region L. So that's at least 5 links. And it does show 2023 RWPG materials, and on this page we can finally find out that in fact there's a meeting today. So I would really invite you to consider, how can you invite people to know about the work you're doing? And if it is something that needs to be sustained on the external website, what information needs to be there? And if it's not there, don't link it, because then people think you're not doing anything. Thank you.
Is there anyone else that would like to offer public comment at this time, either in the room or attending virtually?
Yeah, hi. I'm Ted Boriak. I'm remote. But anyway, I have a public comment.
Proceed.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm a landowner out of Gonzales County, and I live on land. And it's a family farm ranch. All right, and I've been watching this groundwater business more at the local level, at the Gonzales County, the conservation district level, over the past 10 plus years. But I've done some review of the region plan. There's a lot of groundwater pumping in Gonzales County. Some of it in well fields that are pretty concentrated, and there's a lot of concern by the landowners. Not so much the pumpers, from what I can tell, but the landowners, the farmers and the ranchers, about the impacts of this pumping that is in the region plan and that is intended to be pumped for years, decades to come. And I know that I can speak in of course for myself, but also for a number of other landowners that are not here today. There's a lot of concern, and the landowners are concerned that, you know, we're not seeing a close examination, modeling of the concentrated impact of the pumping from these well fields. It seems like everything's done on a very, you know, spread the drawdown or spread the pumping across the entire acreage of the district. And so when you look at it on an average basis, it doesn't look like a big deal. But when you have a farm that's adjacent to one of these big well pumping projects, and you look at those drawdown zones, they are significant. And a lot of these farms and ranches are not participating or leased or sold their water to these projects. And so when I look at this and I look at the region plan and I read about subsidence, for example, it generally dismisses, from what I can tell, and correct me if I'm wrong, it generally dismisses subsidence. Okay, it says, yeah, you know, so far it's not been a problem, but it might be a problem in the future. But, you know, from what we could tell, generally it's not going to be an issue. Okay, I wholeheartedly disagree. And there are other technical papers that state otherwise based upon my read. When I ask about who's looking at water quality and the impacts of water quality from all this pumping, as the pumping goes on over years, water quality will decline. You know, what's going to happen to all these farms and ranches with all of their water wells and trying to make a living at farming or ranching, which is a tough business, by the way, if you've never tried it. What about that? You know, who's gonna be dropping these wells, drilling new wells, so that the guys that are living off of the water that is under their land that they own, what about those economic impacts and the impacts on family farms and ranches? But I'm not really seeing a program here to monitor subsidence. You know, where are the subsidence monitoring systems? Where is the modeling to predict what's going to happen to water quality? It will decline over time. But there is a lot of work to be done to really fully understand the impact of these very large well projects they have wells very close together, and there is a much deeper and very deserving look that needs to be done at these well projects, so that the water plan is not based upon something that is really not sustainable. And the pumping rates that are intended for these well projects are bigger than the recharge rate. All right. In other words, the aquifer can't recharge fast enough to keep up with the intended pumping. And then on top of all of that, when you look at all the water lost due to leaks from the various water companies and the users that take this water, it seems like the water plan is more heavily focused on getting more supply, as opposed to doing something about stopping the leaks. And if they could stop the leaks and the loss of the water that is being pumped out from farms and ranches who are not getting paid then the water plan would look a lot differently, I think. You know, so I would encourage the region planning process to take a hard look and an honest look at some of these issues. And let's not just brush them aside and then assume that the conservation districts are going to be able to manage all of this. And well, they'll be the ones to take the close look. Because as a guy who's attended many of these conservation district meetings and raised many concerns in public comment, in writing, I'm not seeing the deep look that this really deserves. So I hope that the region planning process will take into account what is really going to happen to these farms and ranches from all this intended pumping, and not just assume somebody else is going to take care of it, or you wait, you know, a couple of decades and then you see, oh, gee, subsidence turned out to be an issue. You know, let's not let the wreck happen, but the wreck is underway. So I would encourage the planning group to let's take a hard look at this. And you think about those family farms and ranches where this water is coming from, because there's a lot of very unhappy people right now whose livelihoods are being impacted, and it's not right. So that's my comment for the day.
Thank you. Appreciate your comment.
Thank
Is
you.
there anyone else that would like to offer public comment at the time? Okay. There being none, we'll move forward to agenda item 3. Consideration of the minutes of the previous meeting. Those minutes were included in the meeting packet before the meeting.
Mr. Chair, I have one correction. Agenda item number 9, discussion on the last sentence says Ms. Savage will no longer be representing June 15, that should be June 13.
Is there any other discussion or recommendation for revision? There being none, is there a recommendation to approve the minutes with the revision suggested by Mr. Levis?
So moved.
Second. Any opposition to the motion? Being none, we shall pass by consensus. Move to agenda item 4, discussion appropriate action regarding filling existing vacancies and vacancies resulting from future term expirations. The executive committee met in middle of July for the purposes of reviewing nominations that the planning group has received based on solicitation for those vacancies. During the meeting, we interviewed a number of nominees. Those nominees that were either nominated for the same category or nominees that were new to the planning group. Those nominees that had essentially been renominated for the position they were already filling, obviously we didn't coordinate an interview with those individuals. After our meetings with those nominees, the committee discussed the nominations, and we were able to reach consensus on a slate of nominees to recommend to the planning group today, which I'll provide to you in just a moment. But before I do so, I want to do 2 things. One, inform the group. I think if you've reviewed your packet, you know we've received some excellent nominations, and I'm pleased to see the number of nominations we've received. So there remains interest in this work that we're undertaking here at the planning group. During our interview, we made it clear, and I contacted all the nominees that we intend to recommend. For any nominee that's new to the planning group, if you would like to introduce yourself to the membership, I want to give you that opportunity. Should any of the members want to discuss these nominations, we can do that as well. Is there anyone here that would like to introduce themselves? If you would, please stand, and Mr. Kelso, if you'd like to.
I know many of y'all in the room, but I'm Ryan Kelso. I've been nominated to represent municipalities in Coleman and Baldwin County. I serve as the interim CEO for New Braunfels Utilities, and I've been with NPU for 8 years. I've been in the water world for just as long. Served as GDC chairman and treasurer and the Public Basic Coalition. I'm excited about the prospect of serving alongside y'all. So look forward to getting to know y'all, and thanks for the opportunity.
So anyone else? Okay, let me list the slate of nominees we recommend. For municipalities, we're recommending Mr. Ryan Kelso. For water districts, Mr. Roland Ruiz, and myself. Yeah, no. Convenient. Self-destructive, maybe. Water districts, for non-groundwater districts, Mr. Humberto Ramos. For counties, Audra Weeshan. Incidentally, she indicated that she would not be able to be here today due to a engagement that was planned in advance of her nomination. For agriculture, Thomas Youngman. Small business, Mitchell Soward. And the public, Diane Wilson. That's our recommendation for the slate of nominees to fill current and future vacancies. Those future vacancies, incidentally, to refresh everyone, those vacancies that have come about due to term expiration if needed. Any discussion? Is there a motion?
I make a motion to accept these nominations that has been recommended to us by the rating committee.
And second. We have a motion and a second. Is there any opposition to the motion? Okay. There being no opposition, we'll show that that motion passed by consensus. For all of those nominees that are here that aren't, Mr. Kelso, do we have a seat for Mr. Kelso? Can we make, space here?
Don't get your knees on the floor.
Okay. All right.
What you did today, we got the time for lunch today.
Okay, with that, we'll move to agenda item 5, status reports of Communication and Texas Water Development Board. Ms. Foster, you here?
Good morning, everyone. Couple of critical deadlines that we have coming up. Next week is the deadline to request revisions to your draft population and municipal water demand projections. That's going to be a hot topic conversation at this meeting. We intend to present all of the projection revision requests to the full board for adoption later on this fall. I would anticipate probably the October board meeting. And March 4th, 2024 is going to be the deadline to submit your technical memorandum deliverable that will also include infeasible water management strategies analysis and potentially feasible water management strategies. The Interregional Planning Council held meetings in March and May 30th. Their next meeting is going to be August 15th. During the May 30th meeting, they reviewed an outline of the council's report and discussed report prep for their report regarding the previous IPC's recommendations. The group reviewed implementation status of previous IPC's recommendations and started discussing recommendations for this planning cycle, as you might expect. There is going to be a virtual option to attend the meeting on August 15th. We encourage you to participate, whether you come in person or virtually. Next slide, please. The Regional Water Planning Group Chairs Call was held on June 27th. Chair Andrews, thank you for attending and participating. The group received an update on bills of interest from the 88th legislative session and received an update on regional water planning activities thus far in the cycle. We've got anticipated contract amendments this fall, the projection deadlines, and coordination with state climatologists. The chairs also received Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. The chairs also discussed population projections and water demand data statewide. They discussed the infeasible water management strategies task, and the next chair's call is scheduled for September 27th. We do have some new educational one-page summary materials up on the planning section of the Water Development Board's website. Those one-pagers are on the population projections and revision request process to give a little bit more detail about that. And there is one regarding uncertainty in regional water planning. That'll give you a good feel for the tasks that are upcoming with the infeasible and feasible water management strategies. Next slide. And I'm going to give you a brief overview of the infeasible water management strategies identification task that's forthcoming. So next slide, please. This task is in the general guidelines for development of the 2026 regional water plans. And there was a January 31st, 2023 email clarification on this. This is a new task for the regional water planning groups. At a minimum, we're asking that groups review the status of recommended strategies and projects with an online decade of 2020 and 2023. And we're looking for very, very specific projects, major scope projects like reservoirs, desal, aquifer storage and recovery type projects that were included in the 2021 regional water plans. You're also encouraged but not required to review other near-term strategies or projects. Next slide. What we're looking for the infeasible water management strategies are those projects where the proposed sponsors really haven't taken an action towards moving those projects forward. Expenditures necessary to construct, whether it's acquisition of land, engineering design, filing applications for permits required for the project, etc., in order for that water management strategy to be completed by the time it's needed to address drought in the plan. Next slide. So steps for this is have a good look at the strategies and projects in your 2021 regional water plan and coordinate with project sponsors to see where they are in their process for the project to determine infeasibility. Again, we're looking for things that require a permit, involve construction, and are shown to be online in 2020 or 2030. We don't want you to be spending a lot of time, or any time for that matter, taking a look at strategies or projects like conservation and metering. Because I know, especially this region, has a lot of water management strategies with those types of actions. Next slide. If you identify infeasible water management strategies, that list of water management strategies is going to be included in your technical memorandum. And if you do identify infeasible water management strategies, you need to amend your 2021 plan to remove the strategy, revise the strategy to make it feasible, or incorporate a new water management strategy to address the identified water need that was covered by the infeasible strategy. Next slide. Key point here Planning groups are to publicly present the results of their infeasibility analysis at a public meeting where you're also presenting the methodology for identifying your potentially feasible water management strategies. And there's a 14-day public notice, public comment period for that. So that would ideally occur in late January or early February to meet the March 4th deadline for the technical memorandum. So keep that in mind. Next. And if you do need to amend your 2021 regional water plan, those amendments are due to the board June. Early June, June 5th. Any questions? All right.
I have one.
Yes.
When you say infeasible, to not occur in 2020 or 2030 as listed, do you mean the 2020 decade, or do you also mean the 2030 30s?
If you have, for example, if you have an aquifer storage and recovery project that you stated in your 2021 plan would be online during the 2030s decade.
The whole decade,
The
okay.
whole decade, and it's not going to be ready until 2042, then you would need to revise that.
Okay,
But if it's gonna be online 2037, you're good.
okay.
Anyone else? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. Move to agenda item 6, staff reports of communications related to regional water planning, including reports from chair, regional liaison, groundwater management area representatives, and members of the planning group. With regard to the chair report, thank you to GWDB, you covered most of it. I did want to, again, bring to the attention of our liaisons to other regional planning groups. There's a considerable amount of guidance, or they refer to it as liaison material on the GWDB website. Either you get with Kai or with Michelle to get the information on that guidance if you'd like to look at it. That's all I have to report.
Regarding your chair's meeting phone call,
Mhm.
y'all went over the bills that the legislature passed.
There was a review of this.
Is there anything that we should know that we should put on the agenda in the future?
Later today, we're going to get a
Oh, I didn't see.
presentation.
Okay, thank you.
So yes, we're one meeting ahead.
I missed it.
Any other reports or comments from members, liaisons, representatives? Diane?
I'm Diane Wassenack, liaison for Region K, and I had surgery that day, so I could not be there, but Ron Fiesler filled in, perhaps for the last time, for me, and so he may have a little report. But I want to mention that I didn't correct the minutes today, in which my last report, I was quoted as saying there should be no conflicts between Region L and Region K. That is not what I recall I said, but I need to go back and look. I don't remember if it was the last meeting or the meeting before where I reported to y'all that there were a lot of landowners at the meeting in Burleson and Lee counties who were worried about their wells going dry due to heavy pumping in those counties from our region pumps. And so I guess if we could say in the minutes today that at this point, we are not seeing conflicts between Region L and Region K, but we're early in the process, and I will report to you if something comes up. Ron?
For those that you don't know me, I'm Ron Beasler. I'm the general manager at the Blanco Ferdinand Groundwater District, and I also work at the Barton Springs Aquifer Aquifer Conservation District. I first started coming to Region L meetings back around 1990 or 91 during the first planning cycle. And there's really only 3 or 4 faces that are familiar to me from those days, so not many of us left. And I've been a Region L voting member for over 20 years now, and I've been liaison to Region K, been liaison to Region L during that period of time, and that's coming to an end. I'm in a transitional process. I'm retiring right now. I'll be retiring as of September 30th, the end of our fiscal year, although I'm going to be contracting with my groundwater district to be a consulting geologist for them. So I'm still going to be in the mix here. But I want to let y'all know that GMA 9 will be appointing a new member to sit on the Region K committee as a representative from GMA 9. And maybe at the next meeting, Region K will probably appoint another liaison. If they don't, I'm sure Diane will cover for us. So I've enjoyed it. It's been a long run, over 30 years. So keep up the good work.
Thank you, Ron. Enjoy your pending retirement.
Well, we'll see. I've never retired before.
Right.
So I'm a little bit leery about it. That's why I'm glad to be a consultant for my district. That's going to help in transitioning with the new general manager who's called out. He's a former employee of mine. And keep the institutional memory going for another year or two, that sort of thing. So I think it'll work out. But keep up the good work.
Ron, do you have anything to report about the last?
Oh, not really. It was mostly committee reports and consultant reports. There was nothing of significance that y'all need to know about. We're kind of on the same track you guys are.
Thank you. Quickly, I'll provide an update for GMA 15. Representatives here wants to do so. We're currently in the middle of our planning process. We've just put out an RFP seeking proposals from qualified firms for technical support for the next DFC development process for GMA 15. So that's underway and on schedule. Let's see, do I have anything else? I do not. Any other comments?
Yeah, Travis and I are co-chairs of the Agriculture and Rural Outreach meeting. We had a meeting with Roland Ruiz and Tom Youngman and Kai were all there. In addition, we met in Uvalde, and it was just kind of a invite the members from that general part of our region out. We had people from helping Travis, Zavala, Medina,
Frio, and Uvalde
County, and we had a good discussion. It was kind of just, here's what Regional is about. Are there any issues that we can help you with? Is there any kind of technical assistance that people would point you to? I thought we had a good discussion. Anything to add, or the other people that were there?
Yeah, the discussion went well. Of course, what we assumed is a lot of people didn't know much or anything about Region L, so it was good to get their involvement. City of Pearsall, City of Honda, larger communities who do have, needs that they need to look at. So we are putting them in touch with the technical consultants to start talking. We would like to have another meeting again in that region, and we're also, I think this is successful enough that we want to do it again in the southern portion of the basin to get that feedback as well. A lot of their, they did have concerns. We went over all of population demands, and City of Pearsall and Honda were very concerned that their populations were already higher than what the population projections were going to be, and that was 30.
Very good. Any other reports or comments? With that, we'll move to agenda item 7, presentation by San Antonio Water System on the 88th legislative session.
Good morning, folks. My name is Blair Parker. I'm with SAWS, and asking you shall receive. Here's a briefing on some bills that will specifically impact regional water planning groups. So I'm just going to give a pretty general overview and then kind of crack into some bills that you guys might be specifically interested in. So the 88th legislative session, it just ended, well, I guess not just, but feels like it just ended. May 29th, it was an unprecedented number of bills. This is the highest number of bills that have ever been filed. And bills and joint resolutions, over 8,000. It was actually a fairly low passage rate as well. I think I might need to check my math on this, but it's typically 19% or higher, and this was about 15% this time. So it was actually fairly low passage rate. The most recent date of interest that passed was the governor's veto period. That was on June 18th. That's funny. That's we'll move on. So June 18th. So as far as water goes, there wasn't really of any major consequence that got vetoed. There was one. We can talk about it a little later, but there was one local mitigation bill that got vetoed, but it'll be covered in another bill. So nothing of any major consequence water-wise. So I thought I'd just start with just a general overview of, I'm sorry, next slide. A general overview of what dominated the session. So there's one bill that the legislature must pass every session. There's only one that they have to do, and that's the budget. And that's always of particular interest to everybody, but this time it was especially interesting because there is a historic surplus of $32 billion. So everybody had that garnered a whole lot of attention from all of us. In the end of the session, the legislature actually adopted a budget of over $300 billion, and they allocated about half of that surplus, so there's still money left. So at the beginning of the session, the governor declared several emergency items related to school safety, ending COVID restrictions, and then also fighting the fentanyl crisis. All of those initiatives actually passed. Grid resiliency was another one. I know we all went through several winter storms where loss of power for extended periods of time. That was a big topic of discussion for the session. We'll talk about that in a little later. The last items on the list were also declared emergency items: property tax relief, border security, and education savings accounts, also known as school vouchers. Those did not pass, but during the special session, there have been two special sessions so far. Property tax was addressed within really in the second special session. And then there's probably going to be another one we're hearing in September, and that will address school vouchers. So again, back to that unprecedented $32 billion surplus. Everybody had ideas and suggestions on how that money should be used. So for the water community, that was water infrastructure funding. So SB 28, and then of course its accompanying resolution, which is SJR 75, they would create, or did create, the Texas Water Fund, which was an avenue for funding both new water supply and water infrastructure. Now the supplemental appropriations bill, which is SB 30, that bill will deposit $1 billion into support that Texas Water Fund. However, it is contingent on voter approval in the constitutional amendment election that's coming up in November. So under SB 28, the Texas Water Fund can be utilized to transfer $750 million to the board's various existing funding programs and to fund water infrastructure. And then $250 million of that will go to the new water supply for Texas Fund, which, and this is described in the bill, it's aimed to provide 7 million acre feet of new water supply by 2033. So in addition to the new fund programs, SB 30 also provided $125 million to match federal water infrastructure money and $625 million for flood infrastructure fund to finance flood prevention projects. So big year for flood. I've never seen that kind of money. Next slide, please. So just to kind of go into a little more specifics, because this was, of course, we're all out there trying to get as much money as we could for water, hoping for more like 3 to 5 billion, but we'll take the billion, right? So just to go into a little bit more specifics on that. So as I mentioned, the Texas Water Fund, it can be used for the board's existing funding programs. The SB 28, it does provide that a portion of that funding has to be used for the following types of projects. So water infrastructure projects and prioritizing for rural political subdivisions and populations of less than 150,000. Projects with substantially complete permitting, a statewide water public awareness campaign, water conservation strategies, and water loss mitigation projects. So one thing that I do want to note, the language of the bill says a portion. By not outlining a specific allocation, it really gives the Water Development Board some discretion in determining those specifics, so it's a little bit more, it allows a little bit of wiggle room and leeway on how the board can actually use that funding. Next slide, please. So with respect to that new water supply for Texas Fund, SB 28 states that the fund can be used to develop new water sources in the state, including desal projects, marine and brackish, produced water treatment projects, and aquifer storage and recovery. And again, the nuance of the wording, I would like to note the word including. It's not exclusive to just desal, produced water, and ASR. So that way it gives the Water Development Board the flexibility to include other types of projects. So we are glad to see that. Next slide, please. So one more, now I'm gonna go into kind of the nitty gritty bills that would impact regional water planning groups. A little bit more about funding. HB 1, which is the general appropriations bill, that included $1.3 million per year for the next 2 years for grants for regional water planning efforts. And I understand from Michelle at the Water Development Board that they're gonna start distributing that grant funding this fall. So on to some of the policy items. HB 3278 by Representative Price was sponsored by Senator Blanco. It adds additional notice when there are suggested revisions that come late in the DSC process. It requires a minimum 30-day posting of all public comment and any accompanying materials relating to the initially proposed DFC, and it ensures that public comment would happen at the meeting in which the DFCs are actually adopted. All right, next slide, please. HB 2443 by Representative Harris, sponsored by Senator Perry. This creates a petition process for rulemaking at a GCD. It's similar to that of state agencies. Just a side note, this bill has actually been several sessions in the making, and it was part of Senator Perry's omnibus groundwater bill. That ultimately didn't pass, but this separate provision did. And that's effective September 1st. So I want to specifically point out this bill, HB 3059 by Representative King, sponsored by Senator Perry. In the public comment period earlier in the meeting, Mr. Boriak had expressed some comments and concerns about impacts from pumping and how that impacts landowners. This bill will be of particular interest because it establishes an increased export fee structure and it rate caps the GCDs. But what's especially interesting about that is it gives specific statutory authority for groundwater districts to use those fees, including export fees, for mitigation. So it'll provide for future increases in the export fees to be used not only for mitigation, but also to develop alternate supplies and aquifer monitoring and data. So this is a big step towards mitigation and concerns for depletion of aquifers and how it impacts landowners. So I wanted to specifically point that out for Mr. Boriak. HB 1971 by Representative Ashby and sponsored by Senator Springer. It revises the groundwater district permitting timelines and any provisions related to board member conflicts of interest. Most notably, it requires that groundwater districts issue a final permitting decision no later than 6 months after the receipt of a final proposal for decision by SOA. And that's effective immediately. Next slide, please. HB 2460 by Representative King and sponsored by Senator Perry. This bill did require that TCEQ obtain and develop updated water availability models in certain river basins. I believe this did not get funded though, so while it says required with no funding. Next is HB 2815 by Chaton and Creighton. So this is more specific towards water district directors, but it has to do with per diem. It raises the per diem. And not to exceed what the legislature is allowed, which is 221 per day. So it raises it to 150 per day. So the next one is HB 2755 by Representative Thompson and Senator Perry. So this codifies the Water Development Board's duties with respect to the Tex Mesonet hydrometeorology, that's a hard word to say, hydrometeorology network, and this is the state's network of weather stations. So the network can be used for a variety of purposes, including collecting data relating to evapotranspiration and soil moisture used in drought monitoring, I felt like this was a particular interest for you guys because it informs on water conservation and water resource planning.
House Bill 2460,
Mhm.
do they have an estimate of what it would take to update the water availability models?
You know what, I do not know the answer to that. If anybody else does, please pipe in, but I'm happy to look that up and see if I can find out and get back to you.
There was a dollar amount given for the San Antonio Guadalupe Basin, I'm certain of that, I don't know about the other one.
Right. Do you know what that amount is in this particular basin?
For this region, yeah, they gave an updated number for the land for this area.
It was 1.3 or something.
But like you said, the bills are worthless without appropriation.
Right, right.
And if they don't appropriate it in this kind of surplus, I don't know if they'll have it.
Yeah, it was 1.78 for the GSA, 325 for the Lavaca, 800K for Nueces, and 500 for Sanjak, 1.6.
Those were all updated numbers, I believe.
TCEQ's asking for donations.
For tonnage.
They're asking for donations.
Could it be that they don't wanna know the answers?
The tactic, motivation, but it's one.
Did that answer your question then? All right, thanks, guys.
I have a question.
Sure.
All of the GMA involvement with groundwater modeling, oh, this is surface water, never mind, question answered,
All right.
sorry.
Donovan, did you have something to
There,
add?
just in the fiscal note of the legislature, on that bill, 2460, it says total cost of a little over $5 million. For all of those bills.
A little over, what was that number?
$5 million.
5 million? Okay. Thank you for looking that up. All right, next slide, thank you. Okay, so now on to sunset bills. It was kind of an interesting session. It was definitely a water session for no other reason than every agency that touches water regulatory in a regulatory aspect or a funding aspect or whatnot was under sunset review. So HB 1565 by Representative Canales was also sponsored by Senator Perry. It did a number of things, but specific to regional water planning, what would be of interest to you is that it makes some changes to the regional water planning process mostly just by codifying that you guys are able to utilize the drought record, or the drought's worse than that of the drought record, which I think is already allowed, but this actually codifies it. This was effective on September 1st. Then the TCEQ sunset bill was SB 1397, carried by Senator Schwartner, sponsored by Representative Bell. And it had provisions relating to increasing agency transparency and communication at TCEQ. And like, for example, it authorizes posting additional materials online, revises the classification of repeat offenders for enforcement policies, and updates the environmental flow process for surface water, and then it continued agency for 12 years. This bill was effective on September 1st, or will be effective September 1st. And lastly is the PUC ERCOT sunset bill. It was HB 1500 by Representative Holland, sponsored by Senator Schwartner. In addition to operational efficiencies of the PUC and ERCOT, and that's the mission of the sunset bill, is the operational efficiencies of the agency. But this bill also became a market redesign vehicle, and it addressed a lot of incentivizing dispatchable generation in order to increase grid reliability, and that's kind of what I was alluding to earlier about grid resiliency and one of the major objectives for the session. So this bill became the vehicle for those measures. Next slide, please. So this is the downer slide. This is the bill that would have impacted you guys positively, and it did not pass. So this was HB 4373 by Canales and Johnson. This was an efficiency measure. It would have allowed you all to post your plan on your group's website rather than having to make copies available at courthouses and libraries a month before the hearing. So sometimes it takes a few sessions to pass a bill. I would imagine we'll see this one again. And next slide, please. So just the outlook for the interim session will start again in January 2025. So we generally have about 18 months to have as many special sessions as the governor wants. Right now we've accomplished 2. There's a rumor of a third, a pretty likely rumor of a third in September. Like I mentioned, probably about school vouchers. And then also during the the 18-month interim bill implementation and rulemakings at state agencies. And then also interim charges will eventually come out, and the the committees will meet again and take public comments on issues and policy issues that they might want to learn about for the upcoming session. So with all the special sessions though, it does end up pushing back when the interim charges will come out, so to be determined on that. I think that is the end of my presentation, if anybody has any questions.
Are there any questions or discussion regarding the presentation or the legislative session? Thank you so much for the presentation. We'll move to agenda item 8, presentation by technical.
You all can see my slides. Online can see my slides. Okay, great. Good morning, Regional. My name is Lauren Gonzalez with Black and Beach. We're going to be going through first the schedule a little bit. So this schedule looks pretty familiar. It's been updated in minor ways since the last time you all saw it. One of the things that I wanted to point out here is that we've got several tasks that are concluding, and then other tasks that are starting up. So task 2, population water tank projections, that's one of those tasks that's rounding up. And then we've got a few other tasks like task 3, the water availability and supply analysis, task 4, task 5, the water management strategy evaluations, and other tasks that are starting up between now and November, essentially. This is also needing to keep in mind that we've got major deadlines, as Michelle mentioned earlier. The technical memorandum is due on March 4th of next year, and then we've got the initially prepared plan due March 3rd, 2025. So this is a zoomed in look at just this year, 2023. And as I mentioned, we've got task 2A. There was this deadline on July 14th, 2023 to submit feedback to the Texas Water Development Board on the non-municipal demand projections, and we submitted that information in time for that deadline. And then this task 2B, population municipal demand projections, we have this deadline coming up next week on August 11th, and that is the majority of what we're going to be talking about today, the population municipal demand projections. And then task 3 will be starting up this very soon. And that's another thing we'll be talking about later on in this presentation. And then tasks 4A and 4B, the identification of water needs and feasible strategies, and drought response information, task 7. And so for today's meeting, we're going to be mainly focusing on finalizing feedback to the Texas Water Development Board on population and municipal demand projections. And at the next meeting, November 2nd, I anticipate that we'll be focusing on adopting hydrologic variances, which is from task 3. And then also doing, as Michelle mentioned in the Texas Water Development Board's presentation, about presenting the process and the analysis and feasible strategies, which is task 4B. And also the process for identifying potentially feasible water management strategies, which is task 5A. And both of those need to be done at the same meeting, and they require a 14-day notice period. Are there any questions on that? If not, I can move on to an update on our...
I have a question. I'm sorry, can y'all hear me?
Yes.
This is Vanessa. Sorry, let me fix my video here so you can see me. So on task 3 where it says water availability and supply analysis. I just want to make sure I'm like reading this correctly. So that's something that has already been started, but is ongoing for now.
Well,
That work?
we have started it in the sense of, we've started looking at the water availability models. And that will then kick off the actual evaluation and analysis of existing supplies and availability.
Okay, and so when does that like come back to the planning group for input?
Well, we'll be coming back to the planning group for the adoption of the hydrologic variance in November. And then in terms of the presenting the results of the evaluation, I imagine that would be in February of next year. And that would be for, in anticipation of the March 4th technical memo deadline.
Okay, and I'm sorry if you already explained this, but can you explain what the hydrologic variance is? I'm not sure if I understand.
Sure, and I may have misspoke. It should be hydrologic assumptions. So essentially, we develop hydrologic assumptions, and then if a variance from what the standard assumptions are would need to be requested, then that would also need to be voted on by the Regional Water Planning Group at the November meeting. And so it's basically identifies what water availability models, what versions we'll be using, the role of reuse within the region. It'll be identifying any other models that we might use, and what the period of records are, things like that.
Okay, thank you, that's helpful.
No problem. Thank you for the question. Are there any other questions on the schedule? Then, here's an update on our completed efforts. We submitted the feedback to the Texas Water Development Board on the non-municipal demand projections. The Population and Water Demands Work Group met in May and June and July to review the population and municipal demand projections and prepare recommendations to you all, which we'll be presenting today. And then the next step is to complete and submit to the Texas Water Development Board a memo regarding Regional Water Planning Group approved revisions by next week's deadline of August 11th. And ongoing efforts include continuing interregional coordination efforts with Region K, and then also connecting with Regions G, N, and P as necessary. And then continuing review of the 2021 plan water management strategies to determine if any may be infeasible. And so some of you all may be hearing from us between now and the November meeting to request information about the status of some of those water management strategies that were included in the previous plan. We are beginning the review of the hydrologic assumptions and potentially variances for this cycle. And we are also beginning the water supplies and water management strategy outreach. So we will, again, be developing a survey to send out to the water user groups that includes requests for information about existing water supplies and any plans for future water management strategies. And that concludes that agenda item.
You can go to 8B now.
Okay. And moving on to 8B. So this is a summary of the Texas Water Development Board data releases to date. So you may recall we got the water user group list last year, and we submitted comments on that. We received the non-municipal water demand projections, and we submitted comments on that by that July 14th deadline. And now we're really focusing in on the historical water user group data, the draft baseline GPCD or gallons per capita daily, the population and municipal water demand projections, which are due by August 11th. So generally the process here for receiving the data and then disseminating it and then getting feedback is as follows. The Texas Water Development Board provided the draft population and municipal demand projections to regional water planning groups. And this data, these projections were developed from the Texas State Demographer's data. And the data that was provided included WUG and county level population projections that included a full migration scenario and a half migration scenario. And I'll go into a little bit more detail about what that means in a later slide. It also included baseline gallons per capita daily or GPCD data, plumbing code savings projections, and municipal demand projections. Now this data was then reviewed by regional water planning groups who are tasked with reviewing the draft projections and providing requested revisions back to the Texas Water Development Board by this deadline next week, August 11th. And the regional water planning groups disseminated the draft projections to utilities, municipal WUGs mainly, to obtain feedback prior to this deadline. And if any requested revisions if any revisions from those WUGs are requested, there are specific documentation requirements that are needed to support that change. And so here's a list of justification or supporting documents that may be needed. These are just examples of what we could use to justify a revision request. And they may include things like capital improvement plans, developer agreements, impact fee reports, utility-specific population studies, historical growth data, and then also another justification might be an undercount of the census. So these are just a few examples of that. Are there any questions about that so far? Before I move on to the activities of the Population and Water Demands Work Group. All right. So generally, this is a summary of the activities that the Population and Water Demands Work Group undertook. It's a lot of text, and that's because there's been a whole lot of effort behind the scenes, even more than shown here. I mean, hundreds of presentation slides were developed for all of this. And so the work group was established in February of last year, and then the Texas Water Development Board released population and water demand projections to regional water planning groups in January of this year. So since January, there has been outreach, there have been updated revised water demands from the Texas Water Development Board, there have been work group meetings, all to get to the point where we can actually have a recommendation to provide to you all today. And so some of that outreach includes a survey that was sent in early March to WUGs, and each survey was WUG specific, as in, here are your draft projections for your particular WUG, and do you have any updates or do you have any feedback on this? We also held a webinar for water user groups and just the public in general, so that we could provide the opportunity to understand what the process for providing feedback is, and also what's the process for just the regional water planning process in general. So it was aimed at population and water demands, but it also included and encompassed the whole planning process as a whole. That outreach was very effective, and I'll get into that in the next slide. Then the Population and Water Demands Work Group meetings met multiple times, March 29th, April 26th, May 19th, June 27th, and July 20th. That represents more than 10 hours of their time for the people who are on the Population and Water Demands Work Group. So to them, I say thank you very much for your diligent and hard work, because I think we have some of the most accurate data that we could possibly get here to go into this plan. They really worked diligently to review all the population and water demands data and help with outreach to WUGs to make sure that we're capturing the most accurate data possible. And so here we are today with recommendations to you all for the Population and Water Demands Work Group. So here's a list of all of the WUGs that we received feedback from. We received feedback from a total of 67 water user groups, and that might not seem like a lot, but that represents 47% of all water user groups. And by calculating the population for each of those water user groups, figured out that that is roughly 88% of the total population. So that is, we received a lot of input from people. Yes, sir.
To ask you a question, I see it's 47% of the water user groups. and 88% of the total population, but Bear County, Comal County, San Antonio Water Systems, how do I know that that water user group representation is, what does it relate to in terms of populations, for example, Wilson County or Atascosa County? I mean, that 88% number is hugely influenced by San Antonio's population.
Sure.
But outside of Bear County, how do we think the water user groups are represented in terms of, that were here, represented in terms of population? You have a breakout, and you don't have to answer this now, I can get with you later.
Okay, yeah.
But you understand the skewing of that population number because of.
Sort of like what would the percent of the population represented be for not just the whole region, but by county, and you could see what it would look like on a
relation between the water user groups identified here and the individual counties that they represent, what that population was.
Right, yeah, I don't have that here,
Okay,
but
yeah.
yeah, that's certainly something we could do. But we did, I'm sorry, Mr. Graham.
Lauren, just maybe to that point, Travis and Adam reported that Hondo and Uvalde had some concerns about their population that was reported in our projections. So I think that should be worth digging into a little bit more, and I'd like to know the concerns from Hondo and Uvalde were, did we do anything based on that?
We did, definitely. And so for Hondo, they had some concerns about their GPCD data. They didn't have any comments though on their population. And so as a result of that, we are recommending a revision to the GPCD for Hondo in these, you can see we've got these handouts B and C, and it would be in handout C. You could see that there's Hondo is in bold, and there are decreases in their, I believe decreases in their GPCD. And then for Uvalde, they had concerns about their population, that their population was not, that the population projections shown from the board were too low. And so what we did was we worked with them, and the recommendation from the planning group was to recommend an increase in their population projections, which is something I'll get into in a couple of slides.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So I did a similar analysis of all of these WUGs and looked at what is the percent of the water demands that are represented here. And so the total demands is, total municipal demands is 85%. So these 67 WUGs represent 85% of the total municipal demands in Region L. So kind of pivoting to migration scenarios. Population projections were based on, the Texas Water Development Board provided us 2 different migration scenarios. And those are based on population projections from demographic trends that include birth rates, mortality rates, and then net migration. And so the Texas Water Development Board provided the 1.0 or the full migration scenario. And so that includes net migration rates from 2010 to 2020. And then they also provided the half migration scenario, which is that same migration rate just halved. And so the result is that for each county, the Population and Water Demands Work Group reviewed those migration scenarios, the half and the full migration scenarios, and then received feedback from representatives from those water user groups, and then selected the most appropriate scenario for each county or water. And so this is a whole lot of data here. Just the main thing to take away here is that we compared the 1.0 scenario, the full migration scenario, to the half scenario on the right, and then also provided the delta. So if there was an increase in the 1.0 versus the 0.5, then it would show here as a green number, as green text. And so, for example, this looks the 1.0 scenario and the half scenario, they impacted different counties in different ways. Just again because it's based on growth. And so for Comal County, for example, the delta here is 500,000 people by the 2080 decade, meaning the 1.0 scenario would be the most conservative because it's the most populous of the two versions. And so for this example, the population and water demands work group selected the 1.0 scenario to be the most appropriate and most representative of Comal counties for Comal County. Alternatively, for Dimmitt County, the 1.0 scenario in 2080 has only 2,382 people because they're actually showing a net decrease in population over 2010 to 2020. And so in the half migration scenario, they end up with 6,000 people by the 2080 decade as opposed to the 2,382. And so the population and water demands work group selected the most populous of those two scenarios and said, okay, for Dimmitt County, the most representative scenario should be the half migration scenario, if that makes sense. And so similarly, on this second slide, for Hays County, I mean, the delta here is 736,000 people if we were looking at the half migration scenario versus the 1.0. So in that instance, we would select the 1.0 scenario, the full migration scenario. And in Wilson County, again, it's mainly the counties that are not located on the I-35 corridor. It's those counties that are more rural. They're seeing that net population decrease. And so the population and water demands work group selected the more populous of those would actually be the Wilson 1.0. Are there any questions about that? So this is a map that represents which counties were still had which migration scenarios. So the 1.0 migration scenario is in dark blue. As you can see, those counties along that I-35 corridor, those are the ones that are mainly having the 1.0. And then the smaller counties like DeWitt, Zavala, Dimmitt, LaSalle counties, those are the 0.5, the half migration
So Laura,
scenario.
just to summarize, we picked the more conservative scenarios of higher growth, but in those rural areas with the 0.5, we may be overly conservative because state demographics show maybe not as much growth, but we said, no, we're gonna still go the higher.
That's correct.
So we're showing rural areas with high growth even where that may not be growth.
Yes, sir.
Just be conservative with that approach.
Yes, sir. And then put it another way, this is a list of each of the counties. And so for these, what is it, 7 counties here, we're recommending the 0.5 migration scenario for Calhoun, DeWitt, Dimmitt, Gonzales, LaSalle, Refugio, and Zavala counties. And then for Uvalde County, we're recommending the half migration scenario plus requesting a higher population beyond that, based on Uvalde's requests, the city of Uvalde's requests. Yes, sir?
And can you briefly talk about what they needed to do to document the higher, in addition to migration, the higher population request? How both this and all the other one we can do about requesting higher populations in general, how do communities request higher population above the census?
Right. If it's requesting higher population beyond the census or the cap, there was that slide that I presented earlier with the justification needed, and it's essentially capital improvement plans, road impact fee reports, population specific, or one specific population studies. It could also be just providing the historical growth. Like here's how many connections that we had from 2010 to 2020. And you can see that growth and you can apply that same growth forward.
So it's fairly broad and permissive as to what documents they can provide.
Right.
Okay.
It is fairly broad and, yeah.
I think it's slide 13.
Slide 13. Do you want me to go back to that? And so the recommendation for using the half migration scenario is shown on the far left, and then the second box from the left is showing, we're also recommending the half migration scenario plus requesting additional population beyond what the Texas Water Development Board provided. And then we're requesting the 1.0 or the full migration scenario for Atascosa, Frio, Goliad, Karnes, Kendall, Victoria, and Wilson counties. And then for, we're also recommending utilizing the 1.0 migration scenario plus requesting higher population for 6 counties, which are Bexar, Caldwell, Comal, Guadalupe, Hayes, and Medina. And so that's 7 counties total, those 6 plus Uvalde, that we're requesting higher population beyond essentially the cap that the Texas Water Development Board provided, if that makes sense. And so this is a list of all the water user groups for which there are revisions recommended. And we've also included on the far right whether or not they were requesting a population change or a GPCD change or both. And so you can see on number 27, Hondo, they were just requesting a revision to the GPCD.
Well, may I ask on Hondo, who are you speaking with at Hondo? No?
I don't know specifically who, but I did have a note that they did initially say that they thought their population projections were low, but they didn't have any documentation to support the change. So what we tried to do is we increased their GPCD to the point where it's matching what they said that their providing water supply, or what their water demands are, which is about 2,100 acre feet consistently. So we tried to meet them on the demand side.
And the person that we were in contact with was Jeremiah Socaras, who is the water superintendent.
Thank you, Lisa. Yeah. And so if you wanted to look up your specific WUG and look at the changes, we provided these handouts B and C, which are large 11 by 17. They're in the agenda packet. They're on your desks in front of you. And you can look at what the draft projections are, which are in handout B, and then what the proposed revisions are, which are in handout C. Are there any questions about that? So as a result of the WUG-specific revisions that we've been talking about, these are a summary of the requested population changes by county. And so you'll notice we've got the proposed population projections on the left in dark blue, and then we have a delta. And this is the delta between the proposed population projections versus the draft. So the draft in Appendix B, so it's essentially Appendix C minus Appendix B numbers. And so you'll notice that there are only 7 counties that show increased population, and those are the same 7 counties that I mentioned earlier, which are Bexar, Caldwell, Comal, Guadalupe, Hayes, Medina, and Uvalde counties. And the resulting water demands are shown in this slide. And again, this is the proposed demand projections on the left, and we've got the delta, and the delta is the difference between the proposed demand projections versus the Texas Water Development Board's draft projections.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
So where's like the grand total? How does this net out? I'm looking at your previous slide, not on the acre feet, but on the populations. You know, these 578. So those deltas are the overages that we're seeking from the Water Development Board in terms of population.
Yes.
So the grand total would, right, add those together. It's like we're asking for 4 million more people.
No.
No.
We're asking for 738 or 736,000 more people in 2060. That's the maximum. So it's that I think there were about 3.5 million people in 2030 that were proposed by the Texas Water Development Board, and what we're proposing is 4 million. So the delta is 470,000 people. So we're requesting an additional 400,000 people.
We have the totals at the bottom of the.
We also have the totals as well.
Well, you can compare B. So B would be the draft projections.
So I'm an Aggie, you gotta like.
And C would be the proposed.
grand total overage that we're asking for
Sure.
are those red numbers by decade.
Yes, sir. Okay. Are there more questions?
Do the people that are joining us virtually today have this long chart?
Yes, ma'am, it's
Okay.
included in the agenda
Thank
packet.
you.
I just want to point out, as being the chair of the committee, that we did a lot of outreach. We all were involved in the region. You know, we went to City of Pleasanton, we went to a couple of other entities to make sure, and even Kyle was one of them, to make sure they responded to the revisions. We did business ones. We did every effort we could to reach out to get the information that we could. It was an effort on everybody's part to make sure that it was as complete as we can get.
If there aren't any more questions, that summarizes the recommendations from the Population Water Demands Work Group. And the next steps are for the Regional Water Planning Group to approve the requested revisions, which is in the next agenda item as an action. And we, as the consultant, will prepare a memorandum with justification to support the requested revisions, and then we'll submit the memorandum to the Texas Water Development Board prior to the August 11th deadline.
Before we move to the next agenda item, is there any additional discussion of the presentation, the recommendations and posts? Okay. Being none, we'll move to item 9, which is discussion appropriate action regarding the recommendations for feedback to PWPG on non-municipal water. Regarding feedback, okay, on population of municipal water. Any discussion?
I know we're using the best available data that I can find, we're using the highest numbers we can find. It just, I mean, we're projecting stuff that, if you look at, I mean, your migrations, and they're all over the place. I mean, there's millions of people different, so I just want to note that we're doing our best, but I mean, I think the calculations and everything are, I mean, it's just a shot in the dark that we're making a guess here. I mean, just for the note.
If I may respond, one of the first shot in the darks is the Water Development Board's projections.
Yeah.
There's voters who didn't vote, census information that is correct, so we've got to go with what we've got, and so we made every effort to make calculations, corrections. So, you know, I believe this is a lot better than the last plan. We've got to input and numbers, but
I do agree, I think we made the best effort we could, but there's a lot of factors and things that, I know when I talked with the development board, Michelle, we had to move on back, like, immigration that's coming across the border right now, they're not counted anywhere, they are drinking water. There's growth, I know, like, look at the city of Poth, when I was mayor for a long time, it shows that we have a negative growth, yet there's 3 new subdivisions being planned with 100 houses, so they're just saying that they're expecting no one to live in Bolton. I mean, so those, I understand we're trying to do our best, but it just, it's discerning that we're going to be, all of our stuff moving forward is going to be based off of these numbers, and
it's just like a hurricane tracking cone of uncertainty.
Yeah.
We feel most comfortable with the short term. The long term gets a lot of variability, so that's why I recycle it.
No, I'm just, for the note, I wanted to throw that out there.
I think every water plan, we had some folks look back, has, since the 80s, and especially since state water planning as we know it now, since the 90s, has always undershot the true, underprojected the actual growth. I think what we're seeing now, this is really, I think, the canary in the coal mine. I was interested to see if the chair's call had any more color around this, but I think this is going to be the first state water plan that we truly have unmet municipal needs in near-term decades. And criticisms from past plans of over planning and, oh, this isn't gonna happen. Well, it's all happening. And it's all happening before the 2040 decade. So I mean, I agree with you, but I think we've done the best that we can by lessening the loss where there's a projected loss and plussing up where the board has already indicated where we have metrics and justifications to show that. That's why I was wondering what our net plus was, because we're gonna have other issues to address. And I love that Michelle noted the uncertainty memo that was online, because I think we all get that newsletter from the water board. And I think that underscores the reality of what we're working with. These are best efforts to make sure we have supplies for all user groups, but have a good recognition where in the past, I think an unmet need in ag was somewhat acceptable because of the economic loss is much less than a municipal unmet need.
I think you can tell your constituent groups we were as conservative as we could do without any more information. Still would have plus up in 7 counties.
Also, footnote, I will let you know, with Region N, I'm the political sponsor for that group. We have the same concern with our population demands, and we're not going to be able to make it in that same time frame. But we're working with the COG and ADM Corpus Christi to do a basically population census. They're showing their numbers where they had a huge decrease in a lot of the counties, and they had the same expressed concerns about something. We're working with them, with the university and the COG, but we won't have that information until the spring of 2024, which is it's going to be late for this, but we will be able to compare some more updated data.
I think the good news about this process, though, right, iterative. We can amend the plan as things are really developing in short terms. You can always come back if you're looking for funding needed through the Water Development Board. You need to be in the water plan. Obviously we'll grease the skids as a region, and I know the Water Board will always do whatever efforts are needed to ensure that cheap debt is available.
That legislation where they moved $1 billion over for water, but you see they put an extra emphasis on smaller populations because they're seeing that there's a lot of unmet needs potentially in the smaller areas.
Yes. I could be working with the rules committee on that portion. Hopefully we get that.
I'd like to make a motion if we're ready for that.
Is there any additional discussion? No speaking up, yes. Would be appropriate for.
I move that we accept the recommendations from the Population and Water Demand Work Group regarding feedback to TWDB on population and water demands projections revisions, and authorize the technical consultant to continue working with the TWDB regarding population and water demands revisions on behalf of Region L.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any opposition to the motion? There being none, we'll report that as passing by consensus. Okay. Is there any other consideration under that agenda? Any other presentation? Okay. We'll move to agenda item 10. Discussion appropriate action regarding the establishment of additional subcommittees. I believe there's some material to present here.
Yes, sir. So, we've talked about the schedule and how we have a few tasks that are coming up that may be of interest to the planning group from the standpoint of wanting to develop or establish work groups. And the first is that we have task 3, which is the hydrologic assumptions and hydrologic variances. And then we've also got the task 8, the unique segments and policy recommendations. And so, as we've talked about in the past, we've historically established work groups to enhance stakeholder engagement and to tackle complicated topics of interest to the planning group. We've already established the population and water demands work group and also the agriculture and rural community outreach work group. And there may be a few other work groups that the planning group might want to consider. And I'm just bringing that up to you all for you all to consider today. In the past, in the previous plan, some relevant committees include this modeling and reuse committee, which considers the hydrologic assumptions and hydrologic variances and the role of reuse within the regional water plan. There was also the minimum standards group that was established to develop minimum standards for water management strategies and management supply. And those minimum standards ultimately ended up in the guiding principles. There was also an environmental assessment work group and policy recommendations work group. And so I've gone kind of hand added just the month and year that those committees were established in the previous cycle. The most pertinent of these is the modeling and reuse committee that I wanted to bring to your attention today. So the regional water planning group adopts hydrologic assumptions and variances. And then based on that, we evaluate water availability based on those assumptions. And then based on that evaluation, we then perform a water needs analysis to determine needs based on the supply and demands. And then we present the needs analysis to you all, and then incorporate the needs analysis and the hydrologic assumptions into the technical memorandum. So if we put dates on all of this, we know that the memorandum is due in March. So moving backward, we then need to present the needs analysis to you all by the February 1st Regional Water Planning Group meeting, which means that we would need to adopt the hydrologic assumptions and hydrologic variances by the next meeting in November. And so as a result of this timeline, while it's not, I wanted to bring up this modeling and reuse work group as a potential opportunity, because while we plan to use the same approach in terms of the water availability models and the assumptions as the previous cycle, and we don't anticipate needing this work group, we recommend that the Regional Water Planning Group establish a modeling and reuse work group just in case technical review from the Regional Water Planning Group becomes necessary between now and November. Are there any questions about that?
This is a work group that existed last cycle, was beneficial, it assisted the technical consultant in developing and finding what the assumptions were, any variances, et cetera.
Yes, sir.
You anticipate that may be necessary based on some work you'll do in the interim between now and our next meeting. That your work might benefit from a subcommittee assisting you with that.
Yes, sir.
Bring forward recommendations that need to be considered at our next board meeting.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So, how many meetings do you think the work group would need to have before the November 2nd meeting?
I don't anticipate any meetings, really, but it's that we're evaluating the the water availability models right now. Mm-hmm. And if it becomes necessary that we might have a fork in the road where the planning group could choose one hydrologic assumption over another, it might be necessary to have a work group be able to make a recommendation, to review those options, then make a recommendation. And so we're trying to take out the uncertainty at the next meeting, because it needs to happen at the next meeting, if that makes sense. So instead of sending us back to do more homework at the next meeting, this would ensure that we can come in with a definitive plan.
So it might be one meeting.
It could be. Or zero.
So are you asking us to take action today on whether we want to establish a modeling and reuse work group?
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think that that's a good approach, and I would be interested in serving on that.
Wonderful.
my clarification, so are we using water availability models as a pronoun? Is this the actual TCEQ WAM? Is this surface water only? Are you looking at groundwater?
It's surface water only,
So this is just the GSA WAM,
and the noises.
and sorry, myopically speaking. So it's just those two WAMs that the state is not updating our WAM.
You know what, I'm gonna revise that. I think it needs to be more like, it's just going to be encompassing any hydrologic assumptions. So that would include the GSA, the NOISIS, and I think our assumptions also include groundwater considerations as well.
If it's appropriate, I'd like to recommend that Molly and Neil's work group be established and also use it for
Those who are online probably couldn't hear that, Tim.
Mr. Ramos made a motion that a work group be established for this purpose, and we accept indications or volunteers for membership to serve on the work group. Okay, we now have a second. Is there any discussion? Anyone? I'd like to hear about volunteers. Are there actually people willing to serve? Okay. We have membership willing to serve on such a committee. Okay.
Well, I raised my hand and said that I would be willing to do that. I'm feeling a little bit confused about the specific things that, y'all are going to be considering when you do this hydrologic assessment. And I don't know if it would be helpful for the work group, whoever else wants to be on it, if we decide to create it, to have like maybe 2 meetings, one where we can talk with you about like process and what you're looking at, and then that way when we come back to actually vote on the variance or make a recommendation, I guess, to the full planning group, I think I would feel like a little bit more prepared to actually do that.
Thank you. Good comment. Well, if the motion passes, then we'll discuss the membership and we'll chair and allow that chair to coordinate the meetings if that's acceptable. Okay. Is there any opposition to the motion and the formation of the work group? Okay, there being none, we'll indicate that motion passed by consensus. Those of you who are willing to serve and volunteer your time for the work group, if you would announce your name so we can record that in the minutes, that would be helpful. Go around the room.
Kurt Campbell.
Jonathan Stinson.
Steven Seaver.
That's a volunteer, my kids say.
Steve Graham.
Travis Krusky.
Ms. Hugh Williams, do you want to serve?
Yes, Vanessa Quigg Williams.
Okay. Is there anyone that's interested in serving as chair of that work group? Speak up.
Can't hear you, Steve.
I'm happy to, if it's just a matter of organizing the meeting and kicking it off, I'm happy to do that.
Very fine. Then we'll accept you as the chair of that work group. We appreciate your volunteering for that position. Is there any other discussion regarding work groups or this matter or anything else?
No, fall under this category.
Okay. There being none, we'll move forward. What are we on? Agenda item 11, discussion appropriate action regarding.
Well, are we gonna discuss the other committees or we're gonna wait on that?
It's a 2.
Well,
It's too early?
there's no recommendation, but we can discuss them if you have.
It's too early for that?
No, it wouldn't be too early. I mean, I think the policy recommendations work group was established in 2019, July 2019, which that would be more like July 2024. So it would be a little early, but it's something that could be established and then not in.
Well, I was more concerned about the environmental assessment committee, which was, done pretty early in the process in our previous cycle. And we don't have a minimum standards one yet, or we're just adopting the current minimum standards?
We don't have any of these work groups that are shown here, and the assumption is that we would move forward with what the previous planning group had established.
Well, maybe we don't need to then. I just wanted to make sure. Sorry.
Any other discussion regarding work groups, subcommittees, etc.? Okay, there being none, move to item 11, discussion appropriate action regarding amendment to the task force.
Yes, sir. So, as I mentioned, there was a lot of work that was done on task 2B, the population and municipal water demand projections. And so what we're requesting is not an amendment to the overall budget. So the overall total amount doesn't change. It's really a shifting of funds within the different tasks. To shift funds from task 7 to task 2B to cover the efforts that were expended there. So we're proposing to move $23,000 from task 7, which is the drought response information, activities, and recommendations, and move it into task 2B, the population municipal water demand projections.
So with this internal shift to net zero, you're not anticipating busting the overall budget. I just want to be clear on that, right?
That's right. Not anticipating overall budget.
And are you thinking the drought response one is not going to need that additional at all?
Right, so historically, we have not spent that much money on that particular task. And yeah, we felt like this is the most appropriate place.
Well, I'll move to approve the shift.
Second. We have a motion and a second. Any additional discussion? Being none, is there any opposition to the motion? There being none, we'll show the motion passes by consensus. Moving to agenda item 12, scheduling potential agenda items for the next meeting. I guess our next meeting is scheduled for November 2nd at 9:30. We will be here in this room. Any discussion on agenda items? Well, if anything's thought of in the interim, please contact Kai and we'll see where we can place that on the agenda. We'll move to agenda item 13, public comment. Is there anyone at this point that would like to offer public comment? Either virtually or in? Yes.
Yeah, this is Ted Boriak again. I made a public comment at the beginning of the meeting. Thanks for allowing me the floor. And I've got another comment based upon, and I appreciate that you've got a public comment at the end of the meeting. I think that's fabulous, because as we go through the meeting, then, and the folks that are watching, they absorb this, then they can, they can have another, I guess, bite at the apple, so to speak. With regard to these subcommittees and working groups, I was looking at the Regional website. I didn't see it listing. Maybe it's in there. I just didn't see it while I was quickly browsing through there. But I appreciate this discussion, in particular on the modeling and the reuse work group. And I would say, although I'm not a member in this Regional list of players, I would be happy to serve on that committee in whatever way I could, or that work group. I think it's extremely important that these local impacts that we're seeing in Gonzales County, there is a lot of water being pumped out of Gonzales County. And there are a lot of concerned landowners, and there are wells, regardless of what you may hear. I've talked to landowners, and I know a few folks over here, and I can tell you that there are a lot of concerns about wells that are going dry. wells that used to be artesian and flow, which are now not flowing. And I highly recommend that either if it's not in through an existing work group like the model and reuse work group, maybe it would be a different work group. Not sure the most efficient way to put that together. But in order to address these issues, which are not really being addressed from anything I can see through all of my discussions with folks in Austin or at the county level, these issues that I previously raised in looking at the effect of these large wells and concentrated well fields on pumping at the local level, not just spreading out all these acre feet per year across the entire land area of a conservation district. I'm talking about what is the real effect on the aquifer from this local pumping, and looking at subsidence, looking at water quality, looking at subsidence monitoring, put something in it. So instead of waiting till years go by and after all this investment is put in and the water plan's in and you think you've got all these acre feet a year, and you ultimately find out that no, it's not sustainable in the way it's designed. And I think that is a very responsible and essential part of the water plan. Then I think also too, it falls into this role of the WAMs, of these water availability models. And if you can't pump as heavy as you thought you could out of a particular well field because it's causing too much damage, well then that should be in the plan. That shouldn't be something that's ignored or just saying, okay, well, the conservation district's responsible for that. We're not going to look at it. But I think this needs to be part of the group. And also, it needs to include a look of the environmental impacts that are going to be resulting from this at these concentrated pumping levels. Because there's plenty of stories out of Gonzales County where the effects are being seen. And we got a long way to go yet. But we need to look at the sustainability of not just the entire plan, but we need to look at the sustainability of some of these very heavy well fields where there's a lot of pumping in concentrated areas. And so I think also too, we need to take into account the water level monitoring. And there needs to be more data points so that you get a better understanding of really what these water levels really are, as opposed to the way it's currently being done. And the data that's being fed, from what I understand and the research I've done, the data relative to the pumping is pretty light in order for me, when I read over it, to have any kind of confidence to know that this is really something that's accurate enough to be used for any kind of a planning process where you've got the investment of a lot of money. And the potential downside on the farms and the ranches and the landowners who, like I said earlier, there's a lot of people that are getting pumped out from their land, but they are not getting paid. And so that is also a sustainability factor that I think should be considered here, because that can only go on for so long. So the plan right now, the way I see it, is based upon taking of massive amounts of water from landowners that are not being compensated. And that to me is not much of a plan. So I would love to serve on that group, or in whatever way I could participate, to kind of give you the landowner's view, somebody that's on the receiving end of all of this. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Right. Are there any other comments to be offered at this time?
Ted, in the comments in the chat for this meeting, Kate asked for your email to include you in those. So just send your email in the chat and you can be included.
Okay, with that, we'll move to agenda item 14, adjournment. Move. Second. Any opposition? There being none, we adjourn. Thank you. Great.